Today I'm going to be talking about Montenegro, The Divided Land by Dr. Thomas Fleming. And this is part of, I don't know, a mini series, I would call it, of travel assisted reading. I started reading this before I came to Montenegro. I read part of it while I was in Montenegro, and I finished it after I'd left Montenegro. And one of my favorite ways to enter into a culture is through their stomach by eating their food and talking to their people and listening to them while we eat food together. But another way I like to is by reading some history because then you can bring the questions that the history book demands of you or presents to you and test it with the population, say, I've read such and such, is this true, etc. And Montenegro, small country, which unfortunately most people wouldn't be able to find on a map. It's part of the Balkans, a large nation, a large group of nations that now nation states that were part of the former Yugoslavia. And with a long and complicated history, one of the things that you have to understand about the Balkans, and something I think I understand more now that I've spent a lot of time there, I've probably spent 2 total months in the Balkans if I add everything up, but it is a special place, not only because there's great natural beauty there, but because it's the gateway to Europe. The Balkan Peninsula has always been an important strategic place. And so it's not just a place that external enemies fight over, it's a place where internal enemies fight as well. So you have all these different tribes of people fighting for this wonderful land. Now, what I find interesting about the history of Montenegro, and as Dr. Fleming noted, particularly the most recent history, is you're going to find a lot of parallels between the Russia-Ukrainian question as it's played out over the last couple years, and we're talking 2022 to 2023 and beyond, and the current situation with the Serbs and the Montenegrins. So it is true that the Ukrainians and the Russians come from a shared ethnic stock. It's not that Ukrainians are Chinese and the Russians are Australian and they have nothing to do with each other. The Ukrainians and the Russians share a lot. Well, it's true of the Serbs and Montenegrins. In fact, ethnically, many Montenegrins are Serbs. But what has happened, particularly in the post-nation state era, or we're in the nation state era now, rather in post Montenegro as a nation state, as it's developed, there's a desire to develop more of an identity as Montenegrin, which means we are not Serbia. Now, there's some practical reasons for that. We don't want to get caught up in the challenges that Serbia has gotten itself into in the region, whether that's with Kosovo or wherever else, or its position that it takes with with Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, and the Republika Srpska. But the narrative from Serbia is, hey, we're all one people. We used to, in fact, be together. In fact, Montenegro and Serbia were the last remaining parts of what was then called Yugoslavia. So, yes, that's true. However, what has happened over time is there's been a desire, at least among a non-minority, and so we can't say it's just a radical, small portion of the population. A significant portion of the population has now pushed for a different identity, whether that's right or wrong. And when you realize in the Balkans that that identity flows not just from your ethnicity, but from your religion, and what what tensions relate to this with Serbia goes back, and it's covered in this book by Dr. Fleming. It goes back to the Serbian Orthodox Church, which you have to remember, the so-called Orthodox religion claims to have some sort of jurisdiction from I don't know where to give what is called autocephaly to other churches. So the Church of Constantinople, which is not a historically apostolically established church, right? The established sees of early Christianity, Alexandria, Antioch, Rome, these were all the established sees. Constantinople came many, many centuries later, and yet somehow it's claimed to have some sort of mandate to give independence to other churches. So that historical discussion aside, which we could leave for another time, and I'm sure the Ortho Bros will be active in the comments on that. But the so-called Orthodox Church gave autocephaly to the Serbian Orthodox Church very early, and there's Saint Sava is one of the early saints of that church, and Montenegro today still has many Serbian Orthodox churches, and the way legally it works is that the Serbian Orthodox Church owns those properties, even though they're in Montenegro. And there are some tensions here because there are some questions for some Montenegrins to have a separate Montenegrin church, which is autocephalous from the Serbians, which you have to realize the Serbians have to understand that if they can make an argument that they can be autocephalous from Constantinople, there's no reason that the Montenegrins can't say that they're autocephalous from the Serbians. Again, a discussion for another day, but my point is that you you can't only look at ethnicity in this part of the world. That religion is a really important thing as well. In fact, for many centuries, the Montenegrins were governed by their bishops. So you have an entire line of bishops acting as the what we would call today the executive, what we in those times would have called the prince of those areas. So you have that already. Then you have tensions from the outside. So you have Venice and Genoa coming over to try to dominate the coastline, and Montenegro's got a coastline that enters into an interior bay. That's where Kotor and some of the other historical places are and were at the time. And then you have the ambition of the Ottomans coming up to take over the Balkans. So into all of this is is the history of Montenegro, and it's only one of the Balkan states. So it might be a big ask for me to say, "Hey, read about Montenegro," when you haven't even read about the other Balkan states. But I think actually, if you look at it, it's not very big book. It's maybe 100 150 pages altogether. But I think it would actually give you a nice entree into the region and a nice entree into understanding the tensions of this region as I've just now tried to articulate them. And as I say, this is travel assisted reading. The words of this book come to life in my travels. And one of the things that was wonderful for me to experience was the hospitality in the Balkans. In every single Balkan country, I was made to feel welcome. I was made to feel that these people were interested in where I came from. They wanted to know, why did I come to their country? What would they like to know? My very first night in Montenegro, my host in Kotor, he said, no, we're not going to check in here. Have a seat and have some of my grandma's rakia. So for those of you who don't know, rakia is this spirit that pretty much everyone in the Balkans brews in their backyard or in their basement. And it's always grandma's recipe or grandpa's recipe or whatever. And I believe them. It's very good. It's very powerful. It's not a weak spirit. But in fact, Serbian coffee is said to be coffee with rakia in the morning. So I mean, these people are serious about their spirits. But in any case, what I'm trying to say is that I was then able to answer because I had been reading some of this. I was able to say, what about this? What about this? Relationships with Serbia. What's your ambition to enter the European Union? What does this mean for you? And he pointed out, he said, well, we've had the euro from the beginning of the euro. We've been interested in being part of the EU. And in fact, I found out that they have rights to live and work in Europe. So even though they're not part of the EU, they have a lot of the immigration rights that EU countries have. So they have, let's say, it's a shadow EU membership in some ways. And there's lots of EU money pouring in there. And I think that's the challenge for a country like Montenegro, is that both historically and now, there's not a lot of manufacturing. There's not a lot of agriculture. It's a bunch of rocky hills. That's the country, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful in that way, sort of austere beauty, but it's not a manufacturing or a growing powerhouse. So what have they had to trade in the past? And sheep is one of them. They've had a lot of animals grazing, but there's only so much you can do with sheep. And today it's tourism, and it's underpriced waterfront property. And so you're watching. I was dismayed. I have to say, I was dismayed as I was driving along the coastline, and I'm seeing a lot of these new and sometimes ugly developments come up because they're underpriced. And it says, brand new apartment, 70,000 euros, 60,000 euros, and people are flocking down there. It's not far from Europe. It's a 3-hour flight from Western Europe. It's inexpensive. The people are pleasant. The food is delicious and wonderful and abundant. You're just shocked as you look down and you think, how am I going to eat all of this? Fresh seafood from the sea. Easy ferry to Italy if you want to go. So there's a lot to recommend Montenegro, but I think there's a lot of challenges there. But it's historic. And I think Montenegro, like many of the Balkan countries, are experiencing some of its brightest days but they can't do so without referencing the past. And so that's why you have these tensions with Serbia, the Serbian Orthodox Church, this, I hate to use the term balkanization, but this idea of we are a different people rather than we are a similar people. And I think there is an inevitable tension in the nation state system to push for differences. The, I don't remember the person who used the phrase, the narcissism of small differences. But the differences between the Montenegrins and the Serbians are small, if any, and the locals will tell you that. But what is more recent are the disagreements, and they're relating to policy, relating to, in a sense, church policy as well. But they're not really enough to say we're not related historically, we're not related ethnically. What's happening is other forces are coming in to try to drive a wedge between Serbia and Montenegro and other countries as well that are actually more alike than they are unlike. And that's unfortunate. But I think you'll appreciate that more, not just reading Dr. Fleming's book, but reading other books about the region, and more importantly, traveling to the region and getting to know these people and hearing that history for yourself. So I can't recommend traveling to the Balkans any more than recently when I went. I got to spend a month there recently. I absolutely love it. And I've spent other time there recently. As I said, it's probably been 2 months I've spent in the Balkans altogether. And then reading about it. And this isn't the only book. I'll be reviewing other books about the Balkans, but this is the first one. And if you'd like to support more work like this, please feel free to go down, buy a copy of this book at the link I've supplied below. Please hit like, subscribe, share the video with people who you think might be interested. And if you really like my work, feel free to subscribe at the Patreon that's also linked below. And that way I will continue to do more reviews like this with your support. Until next time, enjoy your reading.